Hello and welcome. In today's episode of Dr. Nora, I take you through my top tips for how to study effectively and how to pass those dreaded examinations. As someone who's had my fair share of examinations from high school, where I received the top 10% of the country, to medical school, where I received the top 10% of my classmates, I am certainly well versed of how to learn effectively and how to smash those exams. And I feel it's my duty to let you guys know what my top tips are to help you through all of your studies. And learning never stops. Let's face it, how many of you out there have actually completely stopped studying? It probably never, ever, ever happens. We are constantly learning, whether it's from our craft, whether we just want to improve ourselves, or even on a day-to-day basis where we're trying to understand different things. For example, how to set up your new car, or how to set up a camera. We are always learning different skills. And it's super important to be able to keep our brains nice and active and to make sure that we are learning effectively so that we can consolidate that learning for the future and return back to it when we most need it. Now, my first question for you guys is, how many of you know what kind of a learner you are? I'm going to give you 5 seconds to drop this into the comment section below and let me know what type of learner you are. Because let's face it, there are different types of learners and not one person is the same as the next. For example, you might be a physical learner. You need to see things physically to understand them. Or you might listen to verbally. So I know a lot of people who like listening to lectures or YouTube lectures to understand their information. You might be a person who likes to visualize things. You might like to see things, and that's how you learn. Similarly, you might be someone that needs to socially interact with people to understand something. Or you might be a solitary learner, which is where you kind of want to just go home, you learn your books by yourself, and you don't have much external environment to talk to you. Or you may be somebody who is a logical learner, which is where you need logic to understand something. And all of these learning methods are completely valid, and whatever works for you is the best method. Now, it'll take some time for you to acquire which kind of learner you are, and you'll probably pick this up when you're listening to lectures, when you're at class, when you're at school, and you're trying to understand, what do I know? What do I learn best from this classroom that I'm in? How do I absorb that information? And as soon as you've worked out what kind of learner you are, everything else becomes a lot more straightforward, because then you can adapt your learning to that particular method. Now, for me personally, I know I'm quite a visual and a physical learner, which means that I like to see things, and I also like to write things down a lot of times to make sure that I've got that information consolidated in my brain. And so for me personally, what I had to do, or what I do for my studying, is I make sure that I write lots of notes, but they're concise notes. We'll come back to that very shortly. Lots of notes, maybe post-it notes, maybe flashcards, and those little pieces of information will help me to consolidate that learning further on. Okay, so now you've worked out what kind of learner you are and you've got the exams on the horizon. We need to now know how to best plan for those examinations. And the best way to do that is to consider your timing. So what do I mean by this? Well, if your exam is in 6 months' time, you can obviously start learning from now and you'll learn some bits and pieces. But the problem is, if you start learning too early on, then you may find that as time goes on and as you get closer to the examination period, you may forget a lot of the information. And conversely, if you start too short close to your examinations, you might find that, you're having to cram a lot of information to a short period of time. And one, you may not have enough time to finish it all. And secondly, we know that sometimes that type of learning isn't always the best for long-term memory. It might be good for short-term, but certainly applying that knowledge later on in the future, you may have difficulties with. And so it's really important for you guys to work out how you want to space your timing. Now, for me personally, when I reflect back on how I did it for myself, I used to, for the end of the semester, allow about 10 weeks, 8 to 10 weeks for myself to do some active learning for that particular module. So I'd say, well, I've got 10 weeks left until my examination. I know I've got, say, 7 modules. And what I want to do is each week I want to tackle one module, leaving me with 3 extra weeks at the end of that 10-week program to, 1, go over anything that I've missed out, or 2, if I haven't got time to complete any of those modules, I've got a bit of extra time there. And 3, during that last final couple of weeks, which is before my examinations, because I've spent so much time going through all of my modules, hopefully it's all consolidated in my brain, I'll then go over each one of them briefly, very briefly, not necessarily spending a week now, but perhaps spending a few hours or even a day over those different modules and making sure that I've got everything in my head and I've got that long-term memory. But you're probably thinking, Dr. Nora, how do you have so much time in your day? And is it just study, 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 or can I do other things as well? Well, let's face it, examinations can be a very stressful time in anybody's lives. And it could be a very stressful time if you're going to have your assignment coming up as well. You need to hand in your thesis, or for example, you've got a big assignment to hand in. Now, my next point for you guys is to make sure you have got a routine, because yes, although it can be very tempting to knuckle down and put your head down for 10 weeks nonstop and not open your windows or not let the daylight come into your room, it is also not very healthy to do that either. So really, my next point for you guys is to make sure you've got a routine. So this could be having a little timetable on your desk, which is what I used to do, and give yourself allocated times for studying. But not only that, you'll give yourself some time to break as well. So you don't really want to be studying nonstop because there's only so much our brains can take in all at once. We do need to have breaks. We need to have breaks for the toilet. We need to have breaks for fueling our brain with lovely food and nutrition. And we also need to have breaks to have some exercise or do another hobby that takes your mind away from your studying. It's super important to do this because one, it helps your mental health to keep you nice and healthy mentally, but it also helps with your physical stamina as well. It's very important to keep your health up during your examination period. And I know certainly for myself, usually I would gain a little bit more weight during my examinations, but it wasn't because I wasn't necessarily doing exercise. It was more just because I was more focused on what I was doing and perhaps I'd be eating snacks here and there. So keeping your brain fueled is very important, but also maintaining a healthy, balanced diet is also a really important key for succeeding in your examinations. Okay, so we've worked out that we need to give ourselves enough time to prepare for our examinations. And during that time that we've got to prepare, we need to also establish a routine for our daily tasks. But what comes next? Well, it's super important for you guys to have some good and comfortable note keeping for yourselves. Now, this can take a shape of many forms. It doesn't have to necessarily be very fancy. I see a lot of people out there these days who have got their iPads, they might have their MacBooks or, their computers and super expensive things, but really, honestly, all you need in a realistic manner is a notepad and a pen and maybe a few highlighters, because everything else can be distractions. Now, I went to Kmart the other day and there was literally a notepad that was for 15 cents. 15 cents, oh my goodness, 15 cents for a notepad. And I was thinking to myself, how amazing would that be if I was studying? I could literally just use each page for a different topic and I can write down nice concise bullet points on that page to say what are the key learning points of that particular module. And for 15 cents, I didn't have to spend $3,000 on an iPad or a fancy iPad plus an Apple Pencil. I could literally keep the same notes, but keep the change in my pocket. And truly, this is what I did as a medical student. We didn't really have iPads or computers back then. It was very kind of few and far between. But all I used to do was have a lovely piece of paper, an A4 piece of paper. And after I'd finished that, say, 1 week module, I would write down the topic in the center of the paper. And I would write little brainstorms or little maps going outside of that central topic there. And it wouldn't be everything because there's no point writing every single lecture on a piece of paper because it's just too long. What you need to do is pick out the most important points of that module. For example, the eye. Thinking about what are the muscles of the eye, and then you can write about what nerves innervate the eye and what the actions are. So keeping it really short and concise, perhaps just a few comments or a few words per sentence. And by the end of it, you get this beautiful, very pretty, if you do it with colors as well, a very beautiful map. And so as a physical learner, having that in front of me helped me to kind of remember, because memory is very important when you are learning, remember those pictures or remember those colors when I came onto my examination and say, okay, yes, I remember that the eye was in the center and I had the muscles coming off here and I know which nerves they're innervating and I know what kind of movements that muscle does as well. So use colors to your advantage, use space to your advantage, use paper to your advantage as well. Maybe even flashcards might be an idea. Certainly when I was studying through for my verbal examinations, we used to have flashcards. And we would test each other on those flashcards and we would only have the salient points on them. We wouldn't have loads of blurb because blurb is really it just distracts you. You need to have something that is nice and concise and tight because the blurb you can always add in later on. As long as you've got the most important parts of your information on that flashcard, you can always reflect back and say, yep, that was the most important part. But of course, you have to know what the important part is. And so it is really important for you to go to your lectures or to go to your classes to work out what the important part is and filter out all of the additional noise on the sides. And now that you've got that wonderful brain map or even that beautiful flashcard or some beautiful stationery with lots of colourful things on it, it is now time for you to repeat. So repetition is super important for learning. And this actually is interesting because on a synaptic level, which means in our brains, what happens is we have something called synaptic consolidation. So every time you learn something, the synapses, which are essentially the nerves, if you like, or the neurons that carry information, actually get a lot stronger the more you repeat it. And so that memory then is there for long term rather than a short term. So the more you repeat something, the longer memory you will have, which I find is actually really remarkable. And there's certainly some things that I remember because I've revised them 1,000 times over. from 10 years ago, and I still use them in my day-to-day life today as a general practitioner. And so if you can, and if time allows, then I would really recommend just repeating those flashcards, and that will truly enhance your own long-term memory, helping you to reach that goal. So when you get to the end of your 10-week chunk of revisions, you've got that memory nice and solid in your brain, and you can remember all of your information. Okay, so now that you've got your memory consolidation, it is really important to test yourself and to apply the knowledge that you've learned over the last X amount of weeks. This is something that is really important, I find, as somebody who's about to prepare for an examination, because one, you get to see, hopefully, what your examination is going to be like, and two, you get to see how well you would do in a very safe environment that's not being graded by your teachers, but instead is being graded by yourself. And it helps you to pick up some key weaknesses in your knowledge that you can then consolidate later on. These practice questions may be from your teacher, maybe from a colleague who's done a previous examination, and I often found this was really useful as a medical student. We often used to get handed down old examination papers from previous years, and we would sit together and we'd kind of go through them. We'd sit alone and you'd go through those questions as an examination setting, and you'd go back and you'd mark yourself and you'd say, okay, you know what, I didn't do so good in this subject, maybe I need to now just focus on that a little bit before my exam comes up, or okay, I did well in this part, maybe I don't need to spend as much time on this anymore. So not only does it help you to work out what your weaknesses are and what your strengths are, but it will also give you an insight of what to expect on the examination day. I would thoroughly recommend getting some practice questions for whatever examination you're doing, because this really helps to prepare you so when you do go through examination, you don't think, oh my gosh, what am I doing here? This is just, what am I doing? There's no shock element to it. You kind of know what you're expecting, and hopefully you're then able to succeed through it. Not only can you try practice examination questions, but you should also test yourself to yourself and to others as well. A really good way to test yourself is by either talking to a friend. Now, I don't have a friend right now, but I can talk to this guy, and you can talk to your friend and you can work out, you can teach him. You can teach your friend what something is and how something works. And by the fact that you being able to teach somebody something and then they're able to understand what you're saying is a really good way of actually building that knowledge inside your brain. And if the person on the other hand knows what you're saying and understands it, then you've won. It means that you have understood what you're saying and you've understood what you're learning, and that helps to then you consolidate that learning later on, which we spoke about earlier, and that will help you to keep you in good standing for your examination. You don't necessarily have to speak to a friend. If you are a solitary learner, you could speak to a teddy bear.
Hello, and I'm a teddy bear. Meow. I don't go meow because I'm not a cat.
Certainly for my verbal examinations, I used to do this. I used to get my teddy bear and I would film myself talking, and I would talk to my teddy bear and I would watch myself back and I'd critically analyse myself, and I'd also have a bit of a practice mark sheet next to me, and I would work through the mark sheet, work through what I was saying, and look at myself as an objective person, not somebody who wants to think, oh wow, I did so well. Never praise yourself. Always think of yourself critically. Think about, okay, you know what, you didn't get this bit right, you should practice on this, and then that helps you to give yourself some active feedback. Of course, not everybody is a critical thinker, not everybody can critically analyse themselves. So if you think this is one of your downfalls, then this is a time that I think that you should engage with a friend and do some social learning, because very often friends can be quite critical for one another, and you can pick up each other's flaws and you can build each other together to make sure you both pass together, which would be ideal. One of my final pointers to you guys is an unusual one, but it is to enjoy your examinations. Now, this is really odd because who enjoys exams? But when I look back at myself when I was much younger and I think about how stressed I used to get, and you know, stress is obviously a good thing because it helps keep your adrenaline up and it helps you keep you motivated and it helps you keep you passing and so on, but just enjoy it. Examinations are hopefully going to be fun. It's your time to shine. It's your time to say to the world, you know what, I have revised enough, I know exactly what I'm doing, and I'm about to show it off. Flaunt your knowledge, make the examiner feel like you know what you're talking about, make them feel proud of you that you spent that much time studying, and hopefully you're going to get that great big green tick of pass of approval. And of course, if you don't succeed in your examinations, don't be hard on yourself. There's always times to repeat your examinations. It's really not the end of the world. It's so important not to get yourself down and think, oh gosh, I'm a failure. No, rather, instead of taking that, spin it into a positive and say, you know what, done well this time, but I can do even better next time. I know I didn't do so well in this thing, so now I'm going to try and work even harder so I can get it best the next time. And then hopefully you will pass. And I want you all to keep motivated to make sure you keep that momentum up. And my final thing for you guys, is this phrase that I have literally kept with me forever. And it is, Failing to prepare is preparing to fail. So really take heed of that. If you don't prepare for your examinations, you are literally preparing to fail. And that is something that I always think about whenever I'm sitting in an examination. If I'm about to do an assignment, if I'm not prepared enough for it, then I'm bound to fail. I hope you guys have found this video useful, and please let me know what your study tips are in the comment section below. But for now, take care and stay healthy.